Hello and welcome everyone to this second part in our Catch the Wave webinar series. I'm Lawrence Webb, President-elect of IOSH, and I'm your host for today as we continue to look at sustainability, the importance of people within sustainability, and specifically what social sustainability is and the role that OSH can play in creating and maintaining socially sustainable businesses. Now, last month, IOSH launched Catch the Wave because social issues such as OSH, well-being, human capital and relationships have become increasingly recognised as central to sustainability and integral to environmental protection and economic prosperity. IOSH believes that organisations and communities worldwide cannot be sustainable without goodOSH. We believe and recognise that the work of the occupational safety and health profession that we represent is inextricably linked to social sustainability, and that stronger links between OSH and sustainability can help ensure that OSH is viewed more strategically. Workers who are protected from harm at work are likely to be motivated, healthier and more productive. And as a result, employers enjoy reduced risk, better reputation and other benefits. So by taking a health and safety perspective, a business can not only manage the risks to its workforce, but also secure its long-term prosperity. And this can be important across the entire value chain. Now, our first webinar in the series focused on our white paper, Why Occupational Safety, Health and Wellbeing is a Foundation of Socially Sustainable Business. If you haven't been able to catch this session yet, you can watch the recording. It's available on our Catch the Wave campaign page on the IOSH website. But in today's session, we're going to take a step back and ask what it takes to create safer workplaces and ensure that they stay safe. After all, safe workplaces enable the people within them to thrive. So this session will explore the concepts of good and bad occupational safety and health, and we'll begin to look at some of the attributes that an OSH professional must have when they go about their work. Now, to help me do this, I'd like to welcome three individuals who join us today to help strip back the complex language of social sustainability as we go back to basics. So firstly, I would like to introduce Chris German. Chris is IOSH's Thought Leadership Manager, and he started out in heavy industry in the 1980s, working in production management roles and moving into OSH a decade later. Since that time, his experiences have covered working in the UK, continental Europe, the Far East and the US. Working for large organisations, consultancies and spending time working for himself, Chris has covered many sectors, including manufacturing, construction, policing, healthcare and education, food production, recycling, facilities and hospitality, retail, warehousing, transportation and logistics, as well as licensed gaming. You've been a busy man. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I'm pleased now to welcome Sheena OBrien. As well as a committee member of IOSH's Future Leaders Steering Group, Sheena is the Group Health and Safety Specialist for Sun International, a leading gaming and hospitality company in South Africa. Sheena's goal in life is to make a positive impact on the lives of others. And over the last 11 years, she's upskilled herself, embraced challenges and opportunities, and is now able to influence a health, safety and well-being agenda in her organisation, contributing positively towards the well-being of its people. Sheena wants to help shape a new future for health and safety and influence change in the global marketplace by empowering future leaders to drive their own health, safety and well-being agendas in their organisations. So welcome, Sheena, and thanks for being here, especially as it's actually a holiday in South Africa. We really appreciate that.
Lawrence.
Our last panel member is Welter. Based in the Netherlands, Welter is Safety Director at Netflix and heads the Global Safety Centre of Excellence. His team shapes the future of safety on set for Netflix's series and movie productions. And prior to joining Netflix, Welter was Heineken's Health and Safety Director. Now, in this international leadership role, he consolidated the global function and transformed Heineken's safety compliance system to a risk-based and leadership-led award-winning program. And as a result, Heineken is now a much safer place to work. In addition to his years' experience in the fast-moving consumer goods sector, he's held various HSSE leadership roles in international shipping and logistics in Maersk and the energy industry through Shell. He's lived and worked in 6 countries in the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and is creative and dynamic as a leader. And he's always looking for new and innovative ways to make work safer. So welcome, Welter. Good to see you.
Thank you, Lawrence, for that wonderful introduction. Good to be here.
Well, it's great to have all of you catching the wave with us. So without further ado, let's jump straight into some questions and get some discussion going. So we talk very easily about the idea of goodOSH, and we accept that this concept is fine, almost without question. Now, perhaps this might be a really good starting point for today's discussion. So I'd like to come to yourself first, Chris, and just say, in relation to businesses, what do you think is meant by the term goodOSH?
Yeah, good question, Lawrence. I think the truth is that, from my perspective, there isn't anything I'd necessarily describe as goodOSH. It's more a question of the good application of OSH, and good application, in my view, before you ask, I think, is about being proportional, relevant, effective, and understood. It's a case of taking any particular element of OSH, regardless, and deciding how best to implement it to achieve the desired result, rather than what I see sometimes where we take the requirement and try to make it fit regardless. We all hear the stories about OSH that's been poorly applied, but generally where it's been well applied, no one really says anything about it. And I think that's one of the conversations that we need to perhaps change. If we want people to feel good about the OSH in their environments, and we want them to stay because of goodOSH, then that's got to be part of the discussion. How do we get people to actually recognize the good rather than just the bad? We want people to leave because of, we don't want them to leave because of the poor application. We want them to stay because it's been thoughtfully applied. I think that's probably my perspective.
No, it's a really interesting and very sort of positive start to the conversation. Thanks, Chris. Sheena, what are your thoughts?
I think just to add on to what Chris has said, I think when a lot of people perceive health and safety, they perceive us as being the police officers or the guys with the clipboards. And I think that is what we would imagine bad OSH would look like. Good OSH, in my view, is you have the basics, you have your systems, you have your frameworks, and it's implemented in different ways, as Chris said, because a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't work for everybody. But I think the one key element that really drives good OSH is effective communication. You need to be able to communicate with your leaders, with your employees, to really gain their buy-in so that they can actually participate in what you're trying to do, because we can't enforce something on somebody if they're not interested in doing it. So I think that for me is a critical element of what good OSH should look like, is having that effective communication.
So that's a really good point, Sheena. Absolutely, it's fundamental, I believe, to our profession in all respects. So yeah, great insight. Thank you. Welter, what about yourself?
Well, good. It is interesting. I would like to build a little bit on what both Sheena and Chris have said in their remarks. I've, as you mentioned in the introduction, worked for many different large businesses around the world, and what I've learned that there's not really any point in trying to aspire to have the OSH program that the other business that you happen to know about has implemented. What I've learned is that, and maybe that's another dimension on top of what Chris was saying about thoughtful application, I think that includes relevance to the business itself in which you're trying to implement an OSH program. So in some businesses, a stronger top-down model may work very well because of the structure or because of the prevalent culture or because of other reasons. While in other businesses, you may want to take a different approach. So back to your opening question, what is bad or what is good OSH? I think there is no such thing in the concept. I think we need to build a program that's relevant to the organism, to the environment in which you're trying to implement it, and then fully support Chris's remark with respect to the how. there we can debate as to what it is that we should be doing versus what we should not be doing. But I think OSH is really I guess relative to the culture, to the environment, to the org structure, and to the, if I can use the word, maturity of the organization in which you're trying to drive the program forward.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, it's interesting that from my own personal perspective, that's very much the angle I've always come from myself. So I think between you, you've actually already come up with a consensus really in terms of a great starting point. So let's maybe sort of move that along a little bit, and maybe if I can come to you first, Sheena, this time, and just ask, in what way might goodOSH, including worker well-being, contribute positively to a more sustainable business and a sustainable workforce?
I think from my perspective, goodOSH is really about demonstrating the value of health and safety. And there's various ways in which that value can be demonstrated and shown within a business. But I think bringing it back to what sustainability actually is all about, it's about identifying and managing your social and environmental impacts, but also leveraging them to create your financial impact, to create your financial growth. And sustainability is all about having a sustainable business that can survive in the long term. So how do we make good health and safety a selling point for leaders, a selling point that investors want to see, and the way in which we do that is creating that link with social sustainability, ESG, sustainability, the 5 capitals, those are all big buzzwords that are out there. And stakeholders are very interested in terms of what organizations are doing in that respect. So being able to link health and safety into that agenda and really promote it from a employee well-being, employee performance, how does that resonate to your bottom line? How does that resonate through the financial and the intangible gains? That is really how health and safety can show its benefits and add its value.
Yeah, sure. And then coming back to your earlier point about communication, you can clearly see how those two things, are absolutely dependent on one another. So interesting. Thank you, Chris. What's your thoughts?
Well, certainly to start with, I'd echo what Sheena said. Very, very, very much, very succinct. Probably more succinct than I can manage. But I'm really pleased that you mentioned well-being. I think well-being is misunderstood. Well-being is so much wider, I think, than perhaps people perceive it to be. And I think that it has a very important part to play within this sustainability agenda. The whole subject of human capital, the way I'm looking at it at the moment, is a balance of input and output. We've got to look at what it is that we need to put in order to get what it is that we want to come out. It's not just about just measuring what we've got. It's a balance. So just as in a business sense, we've got to invest in order to get the return. And when we look at all of the elements that are in play here, I'd say there's a majority, I'd be so bold as to say a majority of them have got some kind of link within that well-being agenda. Yes, we've got things about the sort of noise and vibration and DSE and whatever it might be, but so much of these, I think, is about the impact that the worker experiences, and that's what we need to talk about. So it isn't all just about mental health and good diet and exercise. It's about enjoying where you work. It's about enjoying what you do. It's about working with the people in your team and having a relationship with those people, sufficient to make you want to stay. The whole concept of sustainability is providing and ensuring a future without compromising today. And, if we want people to stay, they've got to be happy enough and well enough to be, I think it's already been coined somewhere, healthy, happy, and here. Mm. So we've got to be asking ourselves about what do we want to put in to get the investment out of our people to meet the goal and the vision that we've set for ourselves in our vision statements, and ensure that we deliver positively on those elements. And I think the battleground will be trying to convince businesses that things like happiness are actually real and tangible and worth investing in. I think that's quite tricky. Money in, money out they get. Money in, happy people. there's a battleground I think we're going to have to fight.
Yeah, no, really, yeah, interesting. And I've got no doubt, Welter, that from your point of view, there's something to add given your recent experiences.
Let me try, and you decide if it's worth anything. I think, look, we've talked prior to this webinar, Lawrence, and we've had a bit of a discussion about the term social sustainability and human capital. While I'm a great supporter of the IOSH program, I still healthily dissent from these two terms. I think they mean many things to many people, and some of the terminology is, I guess, overly used. I think the objective of the webinar today is to simplify a few things and strip things down back to the basics. So I think what's important to realize for the OSH professionals that are watching us today is that, from my perspective, our occupation has really developed from a technical profession into a people-focused profession. And I think words like human capital and social sustainability all fit under that umbrella. It is, I think, important from my perspective, though, Lawrence, that we understand where the boundaries sit, because the big terms mean many things to different people, and therefore we may potentially dilute our area of expertise and therefore perhaps impact the value that we bring to the business. So back to my point about being a people function, I think it's important that we partner with other people functions such as HR, but also perhaps the well-being teams, to understand, who does what, where the boundaries sit, but also collectively define a common vision for the people agenda in the business.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, again, from my own personal experience, it's been absolutely essential to be able to dovetail with those other disciplines where you get the overlaps, and that's very much about sort of forming a team and a collective responsibility and understanding. And I like the mention of back to basics as well, because I think one thing that COVID has unfortunately brought to the table, along with all the tragedy, and is the fact that organisations have had to actually sit and think about what those basics actually are to them, and have taken time to reflect on resetting because of the huge impacts that COVID has actually had, and I can certainly resonate with the importance of doing that. So thank you. We've got some questions coming into the chat, which I'm just keeping an eye on as we go, and we'll come back to those shortly. One thing I'd like to sort of mention is that we've not directly, certainly indirectly, we've started touching on things like trust and buy-in and participation, and these are all really important principles that I guess most forward-thinking business managers would like to think that they already actually value. And what we're talking about here is today is about bringing employees on board, making sure that they're on message there. So I want to move along to just thinking about particular programs that organizations might have in place, and most risk assessment and hazard identification programs include the need to communicate findings as part of that sort of consultation, and make sure that workers and management systems have got the right levels of participation. So I'm just wondering if the panel perhaps can give some illustrations of how to communicate in a meaningful way, and what is it that you would suggest is included to make sure that those exchanges are as meaningful as they possibly can be to the workers. And Sheena, this is something you alluded to earlier, so do you want to expand a little bit?
Sure, I can. So for me, effective communication is really about relaying your message. So if we're talking about risk assessments and hazard identification, obviously there's a specific risk we need to get across to the employees. So it's relaying it in a way that is understandable to the employee, whether it be means of pictures or videos or verbal communication through translators. And various cultures, language barriers is a common thing in South Africa. So you have to think around, how do you effectively communicate the information? But then you also have to be an effective listener. So once you've communicated that, you need to listen to what does the employee or the manager have to say about it, and really try and internalize what they're saying, relay it back to them, make sure that you've understood what they are trying to say, and then engage on a way in which you can manage that risk collectively. You might have an idea around what is a good control measure for a specific risk, but they might have a completely different idea around it because they are the subject matter experts in that respect. You know, they deal with the activity every day. So for me, effective communication is really about that give and take, that communication and active listening and engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, putting yourself in the place of the audience, if you like, is really important to make sure that flow works properly. Absolutely. Chris.
Well, the sad fact here is that we only have sort of about 40 minutes left to discuss this topic, because I think we could have a day-long webinar on this one. So the kind of the highlights. Look, I honestly think we spend an inordinate amount of time telling people things that are of little or no value to them. You know, when I look at what we sometimes call training courses, when I think aren't necessarily training, you know, and how we start with 2 hours in the morning about the law and all these sorts of things, I think, when are we going to get to something that's actually useful to them? You know, we're not trying to turn everybody into OSH professionals, but what we want them to do is to understand how to work safely. So let's get to the point of how they work safely. And when it comes to things like risk assessments, I think the mistake, or perhaps the misunderstanding that I've seen all too often, is that we try to communicate the content of the risk assessment itself to the workers rather than the findings, which is what we're supposed to be doing. And in all these years, and it's been more years than I care to think about, I've never had an employee come to me to request sight of a risk assessment relevant to them because they wanted to know how to work safely. Do they really understand what risk assessments are for? And what we tend to do is sit them down in front of a pile of assessments, make them read them and make them sign or tick a box, make them mark, whatever it is, to say they've read and understood. And I think it's that box ticking culture we need to get away from, in terms of that fear of liability in terms of risk assessment. And what we need to do is use that process, whatever we call it, these hazard studies or whatever, and we need to use those to develop the controls that keep people safe. So the safe systems of work, the toolbox talks, the briefings and what have you, and use the risk assessment as a tool as it was really designed and intended, to focus down and distill on what are the things that people need to know and do in order to stay safe at work. The end.
Fair enough. I mean, again, just sort of keeping an eye on the chat, which is just in front of me to the right hand side. There's a comment that's coming from Alan Cowan about sustainability, including decent work, safe work, but how do we improve the training of future leaders within university degree courses? I mean, that's another sort of interesting avenue we could go down. Any quick thoughts before I move on to the next question with Welter?
Yeah, I think that I'll make it really quick. I think we've got to look at what we tell people. You know, I think that if we want to make a change, it's that old adage, if you keep on doing what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. Yeah. And I think if we're not happy with what we've got, and largely we are, but not everywhere, then we've got to do something different. We have to break that chain and say, we need to tell these future leaders something different.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks for that. In what we've already talked about so far, there's a couple of other questions I can see that I think we've already tackled, such as, you know, what is one size fits all in OSH implementation? Does that exist? Well, you know, clearly the way the conversation's going, I think we're all in agreement, and I'm sure everyone on the call today is in agreement that actually no, you know, it's all about the application and the understanding of the organisation, but the employees within it and what this actually means to them. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to come to yourself in a second, Welter, if that's okay. So thinking about where OSH does make a strong contribution towards our people, our workers, and the whole sort of human capital agenda, the subsequent successes of a sustainability strategy, we've sort of, already suggested this requires positive engagement of the workforce. So my next question is really, can you suggest ways in which meaningful feedback from the workforce might be collected to give you the understanding and the idea and the insights in terms of how well OSH improvements and controls do land with the workforce? Because you've all said in different ways this is really important, and what we're alluding to here is communication going in the other direction, and we've already sort of talked about the fact that is so essential. This is really important as a dynamic in its own right. I mean, Walter, in terms of your experience in the organizations you've worked in, how do we make this effective? How do we gather the data and understand where we are?
Yeah, that's I can give you a very complicated answer to this, but I'll try to shy away and keep it simple. I think this goes back to the notion connect before you contract. Right, and that really is about connect with people before you start asking them to give you stuff, right? So, and I think what I like about that statement is that this is really about relationships, right? Relationships between people, and in order to get two-way communication flowing, it is very important that we as professionals connect very closely with the workforce and our leadership, and meet them where they are. I think one of the things that we often do, and I have a long history doing exactly that, is actually tell people what to do when it comes to workplace health and safety. You say, these are the rules, you need to comply with them. If you don't do it, you get an accident and we're all in trouble, right? And I think what I've learned over the last several years is we really need to step away from the telling, because we are not the know-it-alls. We know very little in the grand scheme of things, and I think we probably deserve a bit of a humble pill, if you know what I mean, and take a step back, and rather than telling people what to do, is actually asking what they need, right? And be the facilitator and the enabler of the conversation. So for me, effective OSH is not so much about setting the rules and setting the framework and doing risk assessments and the like, but it's really about creating a social fabric between people, where they feel empowered and comfortable to speak up about the things that worry them. And these may not always be responses to, mandatory safety controls that we need to implement, for example, but could also be concerns about, rules not being implemented, or, them observing behaviors of others that they don't agree with, whatever it may be. But really position ourselves as professionals, more as critical friends of the organization, rather than the as Sheena says, the safety police or the inspectors that come and check if you've done everything that you are supposed to do because we told you so.
Yeah, thanks, Welter. I've just written down a couple of things that I'm going to steal with pride, if that's okay, from what you just said there. Useful stuff to take forward. Sheena, what about yourself in terms of getting meaningful feedback from the workforce to give you these insights?
I think just to add on to what Welter said there, I think that building those relationships are critical. And I mean, if I can give a practical example here around how communication can be meaningful in the sense of how we apply it. A simple example of PPE. Okay, so we have staff working in a kitchen, they need to wear safety shoes. Traditionally, what we would do is we would procure the safety shoes, give it to them, show them how to wear it, and say, okay, go off in your merry way. When you come back and you see they're not wearing their safety shoes. So when you actually go back to the root of it, you'll realize it's because they're uncomfortable, makes their feet hurt. Some people have swollen feet, those kinds of things. If you don't engage and you don't have that dialogue with them and build that relationship with them, you'll never know that is the problem. So what we end up doing, or what we should actually be doing, is having those engagements up front, giving them the option to try on some samples, let them pick what type of PPE they want, and then let them actively be engaged in the control process so that you can get that, the communication and the feedback from them in terms of how we are actually helping them. So I thought I'll add in a little bit of a practical example there on how it could work.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. It's just what we need. I certainly, you know, in my experience, engagement will equal ownership, you know, at some point, and that's just what helps to develop that culture that Walter mentioned, you know, earlier on. And again, just looking at the chat in terms of some of the things that are coming in, our very own president, IOSH president in Louise Hosking has actually said, you know, what place does the language we use play a part in all this? And I would say that's absolutely essential because of the different levels of audience that you could be dealing with and the different understandings and the capabilities. Anything to add there, Sheena?
I think it's absolutely critical, especially in countries where you have different cultures, different languages. I mean, South Africa has 13 different languages. There's, I don't know how many different cultures in our country. So you have to be very agile in how you deal with different groups of people. And I mean, if you look at the hierarchies, you got to deal with managers in a different way, employees in a different way. So I think the type of language you use is very important. And you need to bring it back to the level of understanding that of the people you're engaging with. So you need to either bring in people that can help communicate it for you, you know, and really adapt your communication style in that regard.
Absolutely, and of course that's also a key aspect to people feeling inclusive within the working environment. No, that's great, thank you. I'm going to come on to something else in just a second, but Chris, I was just going to perhaps just bring you in for a second. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So Karen Clark has put into the Q&A here. In the company I work for, I find it's difficult to get involved and speak with line managers just due to the sheer size of the business, and this is a problem. So what advice would you give me? I mean, have you got any experience from the multiple sectors you've worked in where perhaps you could offer some advice?
Crikey, that is a good question. What can I offer? I think one of the things, it's going to sound a bit sideways, but one of the things I think it's really important and kind of goes back to language and what we're talking about language is you as the professional have got to be very clear and precise with your language. So whether you mean hazard, you mean risk, say what you mean, but stick to that same path. It's really important. And this is the reason why. You can't reach everybody. It's not always possible in a company that's multinational, hundreds of thousands of people. Can you get to everybody? If you can make your language really clear, really precise, and keep repeating it, what happens after so long, and trust me, this does happen, you will start to hear your words coming back to you. And you'll hear that because you've influenced people. And that's what we need to do as OSH professionals, is be influencers, not enforcers. So things like the language of risk, the language of safety, understanding the language of your production non-OSH peers, for instance, using the right language and getting that to be a sort of a tide of change, and that will spread. And I've been in meetings where people have stopped midway through a sentence and corrected themselves and given me a look down the table as a, you'll be pleased, you know, and thumbs up, yeah, very good. You're learning that language. It's really important that we're disciplined. And I think that what we expect is a lot of discipline from our non-OSH peers when we don't necessarily have that discipline ourselves. So you've got to be disciplined.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Chris. So moving on then, many occupational safety and health professionals understand that in an enterprise or business or organization, you know, we're often the sole worker with our particular knowledge and set of skills as that sort of professional. And sometimes we may have come across different challenges and barriers to what we do and what we can contribute, ranging from a lack of understanding within the business, ignorance of our contribution, or an indifference to what we actually do. So I'm going to come to you then, Welter, and just ask the question, in your experience, how well do you feel that non-OSH operational managers really understand what our profession, our OSH profession, is trying to achieve? And can you give examples of any really successful initiatives or conversations that you've had that show how non-specialists can be convinced and motivated to think like us?
Wow, not a big question. Well, let's see, if I kind of reflect on myself for a second, right? So if someone would come to me and say, Wouter, you know, how much do you care about finance? Or Wouter, how much do you care about legal? Or how much do you care about sales and marketing? My answers would differ to those questions. If they ask me how I care about OSH, I would say, well, I'm deeply passionate about the topic and let's talk, right? So ask me any question you want. So that said, I think it's important to realize that in a way, everybody lives in their own bubble and everybody lives within the world that they are passionate about. And expecting that other people care as much as we do about our profession is probably unrealistic. Now, I would like to use it as a bridge to come into, an example where I think, a good example where we actually managed to make OSH related questions very relevant to non-OSH professionals. And I think, we've talked a lot about the workforce and, managing downwards or managing lateral to reach the manager population. But I think, we have a big task as well in terms of managing upwards. And if you remember, I said something earlier today, meet the people where they are. And, when you manage upwards, that's particularly important. I think you need to unlearn the language of safety and start speaking the language of the business if you want to reach the senior executives and the senior management. That also means that when you talk to them about occupational safety and health, maybe you should not be talking about occupational safety and health, but about other things that indirectly relate to our profession. One of the things that we did in one of my previous roles is that we got the regional executive teams together after the occurrence of several really bad accidents. And rather than talking specifically about the root causes and the fact that the risk assessment was not done or there was a management oversight, the standard kind of story, we said, look, let's ask ourselves a few different questions, right? Let's pose a couple of very open questions, such as, one that I remember from the top of my head is, why do we treat our contractors differently than our own employees? Right? That's not a safety question. It's not a health question. It's an open question that may be relevant to everyone around the table. And these were executives with different backgrounds and different skill sets. But what happened is that a very active conversation erupted around, how we as a company dealt with those different groups. And I think, those kind of conversations, from my point of view, are much more effective and impactful to get these senior leaders to think about their role in terms of decision making in the business and creating a safe place to work, without necessarily pinpointing very occupational safety and health specific questions or posing them to them, but have general business questions that relate to the goal you're trying to achieve. Not sure if you can follow what I'm saying. Hopefully it was clear. Lawrence, happy to elaborate.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, there's in a lot of the organizations that I've worked in, and in particular the organization I work in now, we work hard to do exactly what you've just said, because it not only does it remove any sort of potential barriers, it improves the context for everybody to understand what their place in the particular world is. And it is so important that you allow the talent and the skill that you've brought into the business to be leading at the right time in the right place. Otherwise, what is the point of that talent and skill? Everybody's got something to bring, and I think the more you can do to level that playing field and make sure it's as much up as down, I think it's got to be a positive thing. So yeah, you're
right, Lawrence. And I think I've seen and heard that some people think that we as OSH professionals have a crystal ball, right? Nobody understands what we do, but we have a crystal ball. And when we look in the crystal ball, we see miracles happen, right? And I think I think that also kind of results in the fact that maybe we are misunderstood, or maybe, not appreciated for the value that we bring to the business at all times. And I think there's a lot that we can do differently in order to make the perception of what it is that we do change. And I think by engaging with the right level, the right people, asking the right questions, we can do an awful lot ourselves.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Welter. That's really useful. Sheena, if I can turn to you and just say from your perspective, is there any particular examples that you've come across that have been particularly successful in terms of initiatives and conversations that have really appealed to non-specialists to understand our profession?
From my perspective, and it's something that I've personally experienced, is if an operational manager or an employee hasn't personally experienced a health and safety injury or an incident, or that they've experienced a risk in their lives, they don't truly appreciate or truly understand what we're trying to do in our profession. And using what Welter said as an example on how you engage with the leadership type people, what's really worked for me is adapting my language to speak business language with them. So, and I think going on, one of the questions I saw in the Q&A there is, what should future leaders be focusing on in terms of skills development? Is, I think, apart from the communication skills, having the soft skills to effectively engage with people, it's also having the business acumen. And I think business skills should also be roped into what we learn as health and safety professionals, because our roles are very technical, and that is primarily what we learn in education. So having the business acumen and the way in which you can engage with people on a different level and really bringing it down into terms that they will understand has worked for me. So, being in my current role, I have to engage with C-suite leadership, which is your chief executives, your chief operating officers. You need to be able to speak a completely different language for them to understand what you're trying to do with your health and safety initiatives. You need to demonstrate, how does it add value to the strategic objectives? How does it add value to the operational performance? Is it going to increase my revenue, or is it going to, cause me additional costs? So I think I'm speaking very similar to what Welter said, just in a different way, is that, you need to adapt your language and how you engage so that people can understand it in their scope of view, because we see health and safety in a specific way and they see it in a very different way.
So very much about an empathetic approach then, and again, this is a two-way street, surely. So if we're making the effort to understand the business and the people within our businesses and organisations that we're trying to influence, whatever we can do to make that work the other way around is just going to break down those barriers and really increase the value that we can add, because that is absolutely immense. Chris, any points to add just before I move on to our next question?
Yeah, I've just one point. I think if ever there was a time for me to have gone first to answer that question, it was now, because I can't better those two answers. I don't think they are two absolutely gold-plated, sterling, fantastic, let's frame them, put them on the wall answers. I think what we have to do, we've got to walk a mile in their shoes, as it were, and coming from a production background as I did, and having come through production management, then into safety, I perhaps have a slightly different view on those everyday problems. So I've been lucky enough, I guess, to have been a very pragmatic safety professional, and understanding what those pressures are. And I think it's upon us to add value to the business, not just in terms of OSH, but wherever we can. And I think one of the things perhaps that, just talking about language and talking about, as a safety manager, you are a manager as well. Let's not forget that manager comes with a set of skills regardless of the subject, whether you're a production manager or an engineering manager or a safety manager. So we need those skills. And I think as a takeaway, if you are not a student of Socratic questioning, as in Socrates, you should go away and look at that, because it is an extremely powerful way of asking questions. So rather than those closed, just very direct questions, why, what, how, actually about the sorts of questions about, what would that mean if we didn't do it? And why do you think people think like that? So tremendously useful. If you're not a student of those, go away, Google them, practice them, and use them. Better questions get better answers. Absolutely true. Well, I'm going to come back to you for another question in just a second, Chris. So no pressure. So just thinking about let's just think about some concepts that are already out there that people will be probably familiar with. On an international
basis within businesses and also within the profession itself. There's a lot of support for the concept of zero incidents, zero harm, and so on. And of course, there's lots of international campaigns as well that put the sort of concepts into practice. So what I'd be interested to hear from the panelists, bearing in mind we have an international panel today, which is fantastic. What is your view on this, and how would you explain these concepts in a realistic way to an organization that wanted to work towards one of those goals of zero? Start with yourself, Chris. Oh,
now I get to go first. Okay.
Well, it'd be rude not to.
Okay. Look, it's a laudable goal. Okay. Who would not want zero incidents, zero harm, zero accidents, whatever? Of course. But it is one that does seem to divide the profession somewhat. So I think we need a longer discussion than we've got today. But is it feasible? Well, there's the discussion. Many actually seem to shun the idea based on the fact that it's potentially unachievable. But I don't think that stops it being a goal. I feel that where the debate needs to turn is in determining what zero harm actually means, because we use it very quickly, but what does it mean? So if we take the scale of harm to be anything from a bump to a fatality, I'd have to say that removing the potential for bumps is not only somewhat fanciful, but disproportionate within an organization that is trying to produce whatever it is, whether it's beer or whether it's gaming and hoteling. It's pretty unrealistic. So if we come from the other end of the scale, then when we talk about the potential for eliminating fatal incidents, I mean, that's not only essential, but reasonable and entirely possible. So I think what we have to decide as either an organization or as a profession is how far down the remainder of the scale do we want to look before we conclude that what we call harm kind of stops here. Is it the bumps, the bruises, fractures, hospitalization, eye injuries? Where do we want to be? But let's not forget that zero harm has also got to include the occupational health issues. We're not just talking about physical safety here. We're talking about noise, dust, hazardous chemicals and exposure, which of course the effect isn't generally seen immediately. So how do we approach zero harm in something that has latent effects of 20 or 30 years, like asbestos? So as a goal, Lawrence, yeah, completely behind it. We just need to work out the ground rules, I think, on how we approach that so that it makes sense not only to us, but it makes sense to the non-OSH managers when we try to present that to them.
Interesting. Welter, what would your take on this be?
Yeah, we all reflected long and hard on zero harm, I'm sure, or goal zero, and for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer, right? No one, like what Chris is saying, nobody's going to argue that zero harm is a good idea. I think in terms of what we talked about earlier, the acceptance and appreciation of our professional function, I'm not really sure if it adds a lot, because we kind of anticipate or kind of imply with the zero harm at work notion that we are extremely risk averse, and I know that some of us are very risk averse, other people are less, but in the world around us, the concept of zero harm also doesn't exist. So why do we believe deep down in ourselves that within a corporate environment we can actually achieve that zero harm, and ask ourselves the question, why is that? I think it also creates a certain distance between the people doing the work and the people coming up with the zero harm concept, because the people doing the work know that everyday decisions are taken that are in that point in time the right choices, but may actually result in people, getting injured or maybe exposed to something they shouldn't be exposed to. And nobody likes that. So, I think we need to somehow come up with a model where we live with the risk that surround us, but ensure that nobody gets negatively impacted by that risk. It's like driving a car every day. You know, I keep on driving the car despite the fact that I know it's fatal the moment I drive too fast and run into a concrete wall. I know that, but still I choose to drive because there's a certain value for me in driving. And I think that is, you know, if I would have a zero harm culture in my personal life, I would never get into that vehicle. So, you know, maybe that's the best way to illustrate how I look at this notion of zero harm. It's really back to the conversation we were having earlier, which I value so much, is that we need to help the people that make the choices, help them, empower them, and assist them in making the right choices that are the right choices at the moment. But we also need to have our eyes open and realize that sometimes things go wrong. But yeah, unfortunately, such is life. So zero harm, fine. I think we just need to ask ourselves, what are we trying to solve and why? And are we willing to live with risk, or are we risk averse?
Deep stuff. No, really interesting. It's a shame we've got sort of about 8 or 9 minutes left, and I just have a feeling that the four of us could sort of sit and debate these things to at least well, probably 6 o'clock UK time. We don't have that, so I'm going to move on, but loving all the different food for thought that people can take away from this session. It's been really great. I'm going to come to you in a second, Sheena. Just thinking about all these sort of, you know, great ideas that people have, and obviously we sort of just looked at one in terms of the sort of zero culture. You know, we often think about scaling things up so that the benefits of the initiatives reach the largest number of workers. But is there also merit, and I think I know where this is going based on what you've all said, but is there also merit in thinking about scaling things down sometimes? Because occasionally some of the measures might not be easy to achieve. You know, it's all very well and good when you've got the resources of, say, Heineken or Netflix or, you know, Sun International and so on. But the question, and we'll start with yourself, Sheena, is how can goodOSH be implemented in small and medium-sized enterprises? And something that from my perspective is important in my own heart, you know, the supply chain out there that make up the bulk of where the work actually sort of gets done, if you like, where perhaps it's less likely that they've got the competency, the flexibility, or the time or resources to take the advantage. I mean, what would you say to that, Sheena?
Hey, it's a tricky question. I think small and medium-sized enterprises have a very different dynamic to what a large organization would have. However, I think there is merit in scaling down in all sizes of business, because you might have this wonderful idea or this wonderful initiative which you think you know, is really going to make an impact in your business or in a large business. But if you haven't actually trialed it on a smaller scale and ironed out the kinks and really figured out what is going to work for you in your organization, it's going to fail. And I can say this from personal experience. You know, we've had great ideas of rolling out systems and tools, and you know, once you start getting into the nitty-gritty of it, you realize, okay, but we haven't thought around the technology aspect. We haven't thought around, is everybody going to be able to engage with it the way that they should be engaging with it? So going back to the small and medium-sized enterprises, I think resources might be a bit of a challenge, but it's about utilizing your resources efficiently and wisely, and really making them work for you on a small scale before you decide to, you know, go full out on it. Yeah,
no, wise words. Chris, maybe I can come to yourself and ask the same thing.
Yeah, I'll keep this short, conscious of time. I think here, 2 words: marginal gains. I think you just have to take each win and move on, and just pick your targets accordingly. You know, keep things simple, strip them back. You know, fancy worded policies to pin on the notice board that take months to write. Forget all that. Get into the business, know the business, understand, and target those things that are not only the most important, get things moving, but pick some low-hanging fruit too. Pick the easy things, maybe get people on board, make improvements. Again, it's about adding value. So don't be solely looking through the lens of safety. look through improvements, look at layout. How can things be done better? What things could you introduce that you've seen in the past that would make life easier? You know, those sorts of things. What bits of equipment, what technology? So yeah, don't just be focused. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Marginal gains, pick your battles, and finish one thing before starting something else.
All right, fantastic. So the last words come to yourself, Welter. You've got a two 3 minutes with the hindsight of your experience. What about scaling things down? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. You know, I think that's maybe human nature, is we like to over complexify things. And I think if I can summarize some of the things that we've discussed today, we seem to be talking a lot about, you know, learning other languages, meeting people where they are, stepping out of our small room with the crystal ball and meet people where they are, become a critical friend of the organization to understand where the pain points are, and maybe forget about some of the things that we always, think that are expected of us, such as, you know, compliance registers or risk assessments or libraries with protocols and procedures. While these are, of course, very important, the moment that you have them, if you need them, you can also just put them in the cupboard and do other things. I think, you know, today's conversation hopefully has illustrated that there's a lot of ground to be gained in the kind of social fabric part of the business, right? And where we actually need to show our human face and become a people-focused profession more than a purely technical profession. And I think that is what I would take away from today's conversation, Chris, and reflect on while I do my work going forward.
It's been a great debate. You're absolutely right, and keeping an eye on a bit of the chat and a bit of the Q&A. There's a lot of people agreeing with the sentiment of what all three of you have actually said. There's a lot of people having some really healthy conversations and agreeing with each other as well. It's a shame that we haven't had time to get through all the questions that are in the chat. I've tried to feed in a few things as we go along, but you know, as ever, we're getting towards the end. I mean, what I would say is just from each of you, a very brief 30-second summary of what it is that you would actually like people to take away from what you've said personally. Let's start with yourself, Chris. Literally 30 seconds. How would you leave it?
Right. I think this is nothing new, okay? And we're not asking people to do anything particularly new and extra. Catch the Wave is a catalyst. We have a foot in the door at the moment, and I think we need to keep pushing and burst through that door and use what we've done over the last 200 years of goodOSH, is to just bring that to the fore and just tell our businesses how much that contributes towards people's feelings, people's well-being, people's thoughts and actions and behaviors that make them want to stay in the business, because that is part of our sustainability program. Great,
thanks, Chris. Sheena?
I think from my perspective, and obviously representing the future leader community, you know, we as a profession, we need to challenge the norm, but we also need to keep things simple. Okay, the future of health and safety is more than just traditional safety and compliance. You know, we need to engage better, focus on how we can elevate the profession into a way that can create a bigger and lasting impact. And I think social sustainability is the way to go. You know, we should leverage this. It can become the glue that really brings everything together. And, you know, if we lead by example and we demonstrate the value that health and safety can bring to businesses, I think we're in it to win it.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Sheena. And Welter.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Sheena, for taking the first few minutes, because they gave me some time to think of something useful to say. Look, Lawrence, you know, when I look back at the last, say, 10 years or so, I feel that our profession has come in, you know, like a rapid, you know what I mean? So it's like, you know, it's accelerated, right? Things are changing. Things are no more the same as they were, say, 15 or 20 years ago. And IOSH has been a strong catalyst for that changing environment. And I think what I would like to ask our participants to do is to try to practice becoming more curious. There's an amazing diversity of thought and discussion, great inspirational podcasts. There are webinars, there are, channels on YouTube, on Spotify, where people from within our profession, but also just adjacent to our profession, for example, from a risk management perspective, have fantastic and wonderful ideas that we can all tap into. We don't need to just rely anymore on the ISO, documentation that we had at our disposition 20 years ago. We now have a wealth of different thought and opinion that we can tap into. As I said before, I don't believe there's good and bad OSH. I think there's a great and creative and curious way to apply OSH. And I would really ask everyone to tap into these diverse channels to make up your mind as to what works best in your environment.
Fantastic. What a great way to finish. Thank you for that, Welter. I mean, an hour has gone by just like this. It's been a great session. I think it's been a great contribution to what's shaping up to be a really impactful campaign. So we've sort of clarified, I think, what our thinking is in terms of goodOSH, or perhaps not. That there's no one size fits all, but we have had some great insights into what could actually push us towards having a really good OSH perspective. And it's noted it needs to be proportionate, but also appropriate for all the different circumstances according to the level of risk and the resources available. We've also placed a lot of emphasis on good communication, that it needs to be two-way and not just top-down in direction, but positively encourages input and participation from our employees, our colleagues. Absolutely right. Now, if we're serious to make workplaces socially sustainable, then we really need to find ways to involve employees meaningfully, and OSH professionals already recognise this, and we've got a central role to play in communicating this to employers and the workforce alike. So their ability to influence and persuade will be just as important as their technical skills, if not more arguably so. So listen, to the three of you, Chris, Sheena, Welter, thank you so much for your contributions today. I really, really appreciate things. It's been a great session to listen to and to host. I hope that for those who've attended, that the webinar's given you food for thought on how OSH can help businesses in the long term and keep them happy, engaged and committed. Finally, in the new year, on Thursday, the 27th of January, we'll be holding part 3 of this series, which will look at boosting safety, influencing managers to manage safely. So right now, you'll see on your screen, or you've just seen on your screen, the details of where to go for more information. So please visit our webpage, the campaign page on the IOSH website. There's a lot more detail there. There's a lot more that you can tap into, a host of information and some great resources. So please support the campaign, and hopefully you can see exactly where we're going and why this is so important. So thank you all for catching the wave with IOSH. Be safe, act sustainably, and goodbye.